First, you should see a slide on your computer screen with the title of today's webinar. If you don't, or if you have any problems during the webinar, please dial Start Meetings toll-free support line directly for assistance. That number is 1-800-644-9070. Again, that number for assistance is 1-800-644-9070, and that number was also listed in the instructional email I sent yesterday. To make sure we have a good quality recording and eliminate background noise, we've muted the phone line, so you can hear us, but we can't hear you. But we do want you to ask questions using the chat box on the left side of your screen. Only us moderators will see your chat, so don't hesitate to chat us any thoughts, questions, comments at any point during the presentation, and we'll, of course, pause a couple times to solicit those questions as well. After the call, I'll send you a follow-up email with a link to watch the webinar recording on our YouTube channel. For those of you who are new to the Minnesota Council of Nonprofits or not as familiar with us, we support individual nonprofits and the nonprofit sector to be their own voice in the public policy process. So that includes training on advocacy and lobbying, being a resource to policymakers on our sector. We advocate on issues that affect the sector at large, things like incentives for charitable giving, nonprofit tax exemptions, things like that. As I said, this is the fourth installment in our series of free webinars. Next month, we'll be looking at how to work with members of Congress. And we'll be joined by a staff member of Senator Al Franken's St. Paul office, Bethany Snyder. So we'll get to hear firsthand from a staff member just basically the best practices for how to connect with your Congress member. And then in June, we'll do a recap of what happened during the current legislative session. And you can register for any of those free sessions online. I hope you'll join us later. For today, I'd like to introduce our presenters. Our guest expert today is Joe Sheeran. He's been with Minnesota 2020 since 2009, first as a mass media fellow and then as communications director. He helped launch the organization's video platform and works daily on messaging and on long-term communication strategy. He is a very experienced communications professional. He's worked as a journalist for more than a decade in Sioux Falls, Wichita, and Delaware before he transitioned to political communications and public affairs work. Our moderator is Jeannie Fox, our Deputy Public Policy Director here at MCN. She's responsible for direct and grassroots lobbying and advocacy efforts on behalf of the sector, and is a frequent speaker and trainer to various nonprofits about increasing their capacity to do advocacy work and also civic engagement work. So Joe and Jeannie, thanks for joining us. I'll pass it off to you, Jeannie.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. We're lucky to have Joe Sheeran with us today. As you heard from his introduction, Joe has a lot of experience in media, and that's probably an area most of us could use a little advice and help. So our objectives today, as you see on your screen, we're going to talk about building relationships with members of the media, just like we do with legislators and other elected officials, and why that's important. Excuse me. Joe will talk with us about how to set up media events and how to raise awareness of your issues, and our overall goal, number 3, of being the source that media and others call when they need information on an issue. So we've got a lot to cover. Let's jump right in here. Joe, can you describe the arena here in which we're operating?
Sure. Thank you very much for having me. I appreciate it. Hopefully we can learn a lot today. One thing I want to let folks know is in our world of Twitter and Facebook and social media, while they are very important types of media and they're important in helping get out our message, the mainstream media is still critical. The mainstream media is still the folks, they're still the outlets that are getting the coverage. I took a look at the list, and I know you guys are from throughout the state. So, just mainstream dailies. The Winona Daily, 10,000 readers a day. Mankato Free Press, 20,000 readers a day. St. Cloud Times. And you can see even the Pioneer Press. Pioneer Press, people talk, criticize the Pioneer Press a lot as a newspaper that's in decline. It's still a pretty strong newspaper. 200,000 readers, 270,000 on Sunday. What the Pioneer Press has done really well in recent years is upping its digital and online presence. Its app, I don't know if you guys have ever used the Pioneer Press's app. It's a solid app, and they're now number 11 in the nation in total digital subscriptions. Same thing with the Star Tribune. 300,000 daily circulation, 578,000 Sunday circulation. And I think just to take a step back, these numbers are circulation. These don't include the website hits, which are much greater. Just some TV in your area that you guys might want to keep an eye on. Mainstream. Oh, the other big part before we get into television is to talk a little bit about weeklies. Some of the folks on the list aren't necessarily in regional centers. They're not necessarily in big places. Even folks who are in the main Twin Cities area, weeklies are still very important. There are hundreds of them throughout Minnesota. They're highly localized, and they're more likely, if you are a nonprofit in their community, they're much more likely to cover you and come to you for the expert voice because you're in their community. They're always looking for content. As the one thing is, as media shrinks and as its resources shrink, they still have to fill the same amount of time. They still have to fill the same amount of pages. So they're constantly looking for content, and they're also have kind of a low bar in their standards. What might wind up in what would be a hard time or a hard story to get into, say, the Star Tribune or the Pioneer Press or even even one of the bigger regional papers, you could probably get into a smaller weekly. And weeklies, run the gamut. You have things like the Kirkhoven Banner way out in west central Minnesota, or you have very specialized papers like the Hmong Times and other papers that curtail just to certain types of populations. The one thing I would say, if you're going to work with a weekly, find out their hours of operation. Unlike a regular newspaper, they're typically not staffed 24 hours, and know their publishing deadlines. Obviously, they're a weekly, so they try to have all their stuff done way ahead of time. They're not running sort of last minute the way a lot of mainstream are. So that's a solid route.
I have a question about that, Joe, about appealing to weeklies. They say all politics is local. So how do you, as a statewide organization like Minnesota 2020 or many of the members on the call, how do we appeal on a really local issue, or how do we make our issue seem local or bring out that local aspect?
Well, there are a number of ways to do it. The beautiful thing about the state of Minnesota is there are a number of databases with information that is statewide. So like we use, a good example is at Minnesota 2020, we are connected to two main databases. One is something that we have in-house. One is we use from the Department of Education. We know through the Department of Education funding for every single solitary school district in the state. We also know LGA for every community in the state.
And that's local government aid to cities?
Yeah, I'm sorry. It's the revenue sharing. We like to call it the revenue sharing program with local cities because it's technically not aid. Everyone pays into it. So what we typically do is when we put together an issue piece, I will then tailor op-eds for certain places. I will have my database, and I'll maybe change a sentence or two around to curtail or to tailor it directly to a particular area. Also, over the course of the last 4 or 5 years, I've just gotten to know a lot of these editors in small towns, and so they expect our stuff to come their way. They know that it's quality research, it's high-end research, and they're going to get a good story each time they run our piece. So it's building those relationships with small town papers. Because for us at the Twin Cities, some of these small papers wouldn't run our stuff if we hadn't built that relationship or we didn't have a very localized piece for them.
We got a question, Joe, about just how do you get a list of all the weeklies, or where do people start for some of these smaller entities?
Okay, so I have a couple of lists here. A lot of these weeklies are run by these three major companies I have here. The Sun Sailor runs a lot of the Sun newspaper chain. So if you go to their website, the Sun newspaper chain's website, they run a lot of weeklies out in the West Metro. The Forum Communications, which owns the Fargo Forum, they also own the Duluth News Tribune. Forum Communications just bought out a bunch of smaller regional weekly papers. Same thing with ABC Newspapers. They also run a number of newspapers throughout Anoka and Hennepin County. So those are just some good spots. There's also a website. If you just type in Minnesota local newspapers, a website will pop up with the list of all of them. And I could shoot you that. I didn't think to give that to you ahead of time, but you could do that.
We can grab that in the follow-up.
Yeah.
On TV.
And so also television is important. Again, Twitter, Facebook. You use Twitter and Facebook to get your message out, but you also use Twitter and Facebook to get your message to the mainstream media. In the Twin Cities, depending on the station and the time of day, you have anywhere from 100,000 to 400,000 viewers. Even Duluth, 62,000 viewers at its maximum. Rochester, Moorhead, and Mankato all also have their own localized markets. They're always looking for localized stories that you could help to get your message out as well.
Hey, Joe, what makes for good TV coverage? Do you need a good visual or?
Yeah, we're gonna get a little bit into what makes for good both TV and newspaper coverage in the next couple of slides. I think in this next slide we're going to talk a little bit about radio. Radio is also important. NPR has done a job of really buying up a lot of small radio stations, buying up a lot of frequency, but there are still a lot of localized radio stations out there. WCCO in the Twin Cities is obviously a good one. KFAI for certain folks, 950 AM in the Twin Cities is a good one. Red Wings stations, same thing with Mankato and Winona. All of these stations have either a local news segment or are doing a large chunk of news for their site. Even if you do have an NPR in your area, you might want to get to know your local NPR reporter. Even though NPR is based in the Twin Cities, they have regional bureaus throughout the state. They have one in Duluth, Mankato, Rochester, Worthington. So they have several local reporters who are just covering what's going on in that area. So even if you don't have a local radio station in your community, you might want to reach out and see if there's an NPR affiliate in your community with a local reporter.
So, Joe, on this next slide, we have an example of a media list. I know you were kind enough to provide a starting point with a couple of media lists for groups. So we just mentioned, and that was in the email I sent yesterday, had a link to those. Can you just mention what's in that media list that you prepared?
Yeah, the media list I gave two media lists. One's Twin Cities, the other one is outstate or greater Minnesota. And what I basically did is just the one thing when you go about building your media lists and getting to know what's out there is obviously you want to create either a database or a Word file or something. And the key pieces of information you need are the outlet, the contact. Usually with television stations, especially in greater Minnesota, you have lots and lots of turnover. The folks who live out in greater Minnesota probably know what I'm talking about. It seems the faces on the local TV news are changing every 18 months. It seems like there's a new set of folks coming in and out. So in that case, instead of trying to get to know individual reporters, which is important, you want a basic number so that if the contact that you had leaves, you still have some basic number to get in touch with somebody. So newspapers have and TV stations would have what's called an assignment desk, where one person sort of sits literally at the assignment desk, and they control what goes on, and they're sort of the gatekeeper of the news and the information that then gets passed along to reporters and management. Obviously, you want a phone number. And then email. I didn't put all the emails here, but you want the email. Because typically when you send out any kind of press material, you want to shoot them an email and follow up with a phone number. So, like I said, those Word files that I gave out could be a good start for you guys. But I would definitely put it in some sort of Excel sheet that lets you, build lists. This way you can import and export the lists at a later point.
Great.
There are a couple of different ways to connect with mainstream media. sort of the lightest, the easiest, the smallest lift is the op-ed. So you don't have to stage an event. You could shoot out an op-ed. Basically, an op-ed should be timely. It should obviously have some sort of local angle, and an op-ed should have a call to action. An op-ed is your argument that's based in data. The good thing about an op-ed is you have complete control over the message. They're not going to edit it out. They're not going to change things around. They might change your title, or they might ask you to shorten it, but generally they're not going to change your op-ed. The problem with the op-eds is there's no guarantee that it's going to get published, especially in the metro. In greater Minnesota, you're going to have a much, much better time getting your op-ed published. The other thing you can do is an exclusive pitch, and basically what that is, it could be a number of things. Your nonprofit might do something very specific that you do very well, or you might have a very interesting story that would work well with what's going on in the media. Say right now, a lot of homeless advocates are trying to get more money in either the bonding bill or in other parts of the budget. So what you might want to do is find a person that you work with, a homeless person or a person that's in need of housing that you work with, and reach out to a local media outlet and say, hey, while what's going on at legislature right now is talking a lot about the policy and the background issue, here's the real life person. Here's their name, here's their number, here they're willing to talk to you, here's when they're available. And you could let the reporter come out to do the more in-depth story. That's the pro. It's a more in-depth, more complete story. The downside is the limited audience. If it's an exclusive pitch, it's usually only going to be on one or two outlets. It might be in the newspaper, it might be on the local TV station. The other way to engage with the media is the news event. That's a lot of what Minnesota 2020 does is news events. News events, what we try to do with news events, it's almost a must with news events, is you set it up and you have your expert. So the person's going to talk about the facts and the figures and the numbers. And then the other thing is you want to have either a local partner or a character, somebody from that local community could tell a little bit about what's going on in that community, or a character, someone who could say how the policy affects, average Joe citizen. The pro is if you have a news event, you capture all the media at one time. The con typically is, especially in the Twin Cities, it tends to be a shorter story. They tend to see all their competitors there and say, there's nothing here that I'm going to have that's any better than anybody else, so I'm going to cut my losses. I'm going to get the information. It's an interesting information, but it's not interesting enough to do a real in-depth story. Sometimes you do get in-depth stories, but usually not. And then also travel time. So if you're a Twin Cities outlet, but that does greater media or wide media or wide statewide coverage, you have to travel to that area. And then you could do the release and the statement. There are a lot of things that are going on at the legislature right now that impact you. What you want to do is shoot out a quick statement to say, our executive director or, our policy expert says this particular bill at the legislature is bad, is good, here's why. If you want to follow up, this is the number to follow up on. With that one, it's quick and widespread. The downside of it is it's a limited adoption. Very few news outlets, unless they're hurting for news that day, are going to cover that sort of thing. But the good thing about it is it puts you in their inbox. So they might not cover your story this time, but they're going to remember a couple of weeks down the road and say, I got a press release or a statement from this particular organization that talked about this very specific thing. Today we want to do a story about it. Let's give them a call and see if they have any specific insight. So that's the good thing about the media statement.
So, Joe, I got a couple questions, and if we're getting a little bit ahead, you can just punt and we'll get to it in a minute. But on the op-ed, do you ever want to follow up with any staff after submitting an op-ed? Because I know a lot of those just kind of, there's maybe a lot of people submitting them. Is there a way to kind of jump your place in the line, or do you just put it in the system?
Yeah, and we'll get to this. With everything you send to the media, don't just send the press release and let it be. Anything you send to the media, follow up with a phone call. With the op-eds that I do, it all depends. Sometimes what I'll do is I'll just blanket the state. And so I'm not going to call everyone. I'll call the main media outlets. Mm-hmm. But if you send a tailored op-ed to maybe 3 or 4 outlets, you're going to want to call and follow up. You want to going to want to do the same thing with pretty much anything you send to the news. You're going to want to follow up with a phone call.
Great. And on, you mentioned like on the exclusive pitch, and I know we'll be talking about this a little bit more, but when you're trying to find the right person to be your voice, or so you talk about somebody who's in need of housing, what considerations go into finding that person? Because, you know, some people may be scared to work with the media. Some people are going to be able to tell their story better than others. You know, what kind of coaching do you provide to that person?
Well, what you want to do is, you want to find someone who has a story and who's comfortable talking to the media. If they're not comfortable talking to the media, you don't want to force them. The thing you want to do with coaching them is you want to have them, tell their story. So you don't want to have the person who's your local partner or your character sort of tied down with lots of facts and figures and numbers. You want them to be on message, and this does take a while to develop this. Some individuals, some people, some clients are just really good at telling their story. Some aren't so good. Basically, what you want to have them do is get a piece of information that they're comfortable telling, get a part of the story that they're comfortable telling, and have them tell it a couple of different times to you and your staff, and have them be themselves and have them be natural. You don't want them way off of message, but at the same time, you want it to be also, the other thing when working with media is you want to keep it simple. Don't get way laden down in lots and lots of facts and lots of detail. You want it to be simple. Media is going to want to know a couple of very specific things. You know, how long have they been in that situation? What would the policy mean to them? And a little bit about their backstory. And that's generally what the media want. They're going to come to you. They're going to come to other policy folks for the facts and the figures.
Great.
And so when you're framing your pitch, again, you want to keep it as simple as possible. I think a lot of times in nonprofits we do a lot of good work, and we tend to overload folks with information. Figure out what the 1, 2, 3 top most important nuggets of information are. Also, too, you want to pitch it in why they should care. We're nonprofit and we generally care, but the general public, and I know because I worked in media, we get hundreds of pitches a day. Unless it has, you know, almost immediate resonance with our wider audience, we're not going to try to find a deeper story there, unless it's a slow news day and we really need something. So make sure when you're pitching it to the media, you explain to them why their viewers care. Can the average person relate? Again, with some of the work that nonprofits do, we're working with certain populations that the general public isn't aware of the situation or what's going on. So we have to get the story to the point where we should show the general public, even if right off the bat you might not think they care, we have to find a way to get the general public to care, and that's a big part of our mission as well. Also, you want it to be character, people-centered. I'm not saying don't do a story if you just have an expert, but the media is going to want to try to find a person who is affected by the policy. Is it timely? Try to find things that already fit into an existing storyline. What's going on at the Capitol? What's going on in Congress? What big study came out? What big set of data from the census came out to help tell your story? Look for what's already going on. Also, a local hook. You want to have that local hook. So even if it's a story that comes out of Congress or a big national study, you're the local expert. You're the local hook. And two, a lot of people overlook this, logistics ease. Don't set up a story at 6 o'clock in the morning for the media to come to, because they're not. Most media usually start their day between 9, 10 o'clock in the morning, and they need to start wrapping things up by 2 or 3 in the afternoon, because especially if you're TV, you have to have your script written, you have to have it into an editor by 3:30, 4 o'clock so they can turn it around for the 5 o'clock news. So think of the time of the day that you have your event. Nothing much past 1 o'clock and nothing much before 10. So 10 to 1 is kind of your sweet spot for having an event. So when you have, whether it's an event or it's an op-ed or it's an individual pitch, here are some things you want to think about. Who's your expert? And is your expert, like I put the guy there is Jeff Van Wyck, and he's our data guy. And Jeff is great. He could tell you every per capita spending in the state of Minnesota, and he captures everything in real per pupil inflation adjusted per capita, which is very, very important. But again, your expert, you want them to be knowledgeable, but you don't want them to be so advanced that they're confusing reporters or confusing the public at home. So have your expert be knowledgeable, but also work with them to really keep it understandable. Your character, everyday people, we talk about characters a lot. Who are the people impacted by the policy? And again, make sure that your local character or the person that you're profiling, again, they don't have to get into a lot of data, a lot of facts and figures. Why does it affect them? Why is it important to them? And have them explain, why are you doing this? Why is this, we want to have good schools. We want to invest in education, so we have good schools. Here's a teacher. He has 34 kids in a class. He used to have 20 kids in a class. Why is those extra 14 kids in a class, why is that hurt learning? Simple. Visual. Think about your visuals. Is your visual helping tell your story? You see there in the bottom corner Lee Egerstrom, that's our buy local. So when we have our buy local report every year, we go to the local businesses and we have products from the buy local report to show. The media wants to take pictures. The media is, even newspapers are a visual medium to some extent. So make sure you have some sort of visual. With certain folks, it's going to be more difficult than others. This is a case-by-case basis. But if you ever get into a situation like this, one, you want to have the internal conversation. What visual do we want to tell? But if you really get jammed up on this, don't hesitate to give me a call. I've worked through this issue a lot of times, so don't hesitate to give me a call. You want your visual to, you want your setting to say something. The pitch. Here's what's important about the pitch. So you have your media event, you have your character, you have your location. This, what you're seeing on the screen right now, is exactly what I send out a day or two before the event to just sort of alert the media, let them know what's going on. You want a quick, simple catcher. Financial burden replacing aging infrastructure hits communities hard. Just a quick one-liner to capture folks' attention. And you want your basic contact information at the top, how they can get in touch with you. Then what you want to do, and we can advance it here, what you want to do between that top line and what you're seeing in this next screen, there's maybe 1 or 2 lines of text just explaining what the event is. And you want to spell it out for them, the who, what, the whys, the 4 or the 5 whys that we usually have. Who, and especially if you're a local, you're trying to get a local pitch, you want your expert, but you want to make sure you have that local person highlighted in there. Just a quick what, you want the date, the time, how to get there. Also, to be mindful, if it's kind of an odd spot to get to, you might want to give the media specific directions to get there if you have if there's a complication of how to get to you. With today's GPS and tracking and everything else, and everything's on Google Maps, it's a lot easier. But you still, if you're in a weird or complicated spot, you might want to just give people a quick how-to on how to get to you. And so what you're going to want to do is once you send this out, make sure you follow up. Don't just assume that people get it, because the person you're sending it to, it might get lost in the shuffle. They might be sick that day, something. Follow up with a phone call and say, hey, I'm calling from Joe Sheeran, Minnesota 2020. I wanted to know if you got our press release. We're having a news conference this week. And leave out some of the key details. And if they could fill in the key details, you know they have it. Because a lot of times what a reporter's going to say or a news person's going to say is, yeah, I got it, and they're going to hang up on you. And you know they don't have it. So you want to make sure you leave out some key details, and if they repeat a couple of those key details back to you, great. The other thing with the pitch is as soon as you send it out, follow up with the phone call within 15, 20 minutes. If you're in a position where you're going to send the pitch out and you can't get to it right away, hold off on sending it out because, like I said, inboxes get filled up, 100, 150 press releases a day, and that's what you're competing against. And some of them are nonsense, and some of them are really important. and local folks, unless it's coming from the DFL house, or the GOP house, or the governor's office, or the local police station, general, nonprofits, we're going to get lost in the shuffle because people don't recognize our names. So follow up right away. Make sure they got the release. Let them know what time you sent it. The other big thing, I didn't put it on a slide, but your subject line. Make your subject line count. Your subject line should be like 2-3 words tops. It shouldn't be a long, drawn-out subject line. It should be quick. So that's the other quick thing on this one. Are we going to move now to?
Sure, but I had a question there, though. So when you were working as a journalist and you were getting all these, dozens, hundreds of items, and I know, what were some of the things that made the biggest difference for you? Was the most important thing, okay, I know who this person is because I've worked with them, they've taken time to build a relationship, or what would rise to the top for you?
The big things that rise to the top for me are timeliness, what's going on that day. I was a little different because I wasn't an assignment editor, so I only had my story to worry about, and I was mainly a crime reporter, so I really didn't pay attention to press releases unless they were from the police department. But way back when I was an intern at a station in Philadelphia, it was my job to pull the press releases off the fax machine. And we would literally have, the fax machine, when we walked in the morning, would not stop until 7, 8, 9 o'clock at night. And it would constantly just come through. The one thing that would stick with me are timeliness and local. If there was some big event going on in Washington, D.C., that somebody was going to have a press conference about, unless it had a Philadelphia, at the time I was working in Philadelphia, but a Minnesota or South Dakota angle, I really didn't pay a whole lot of attention to it. So is it local, is it timely, and is it a clear, concise pitch? If you're rambling, on and on, it's like, what's this? They're not going to take the time to read it or go through it. The other big thing is there an event? What do you want me to know? Don't just generally pitch me and tell me it's a good thing and I should be aware of it. Is there an event? Is there something for me to respond to? Is there a date and time that I could go to a location? Is there someone I could call to set something up immediately? That's what I would rise up for me.
Great.
All right, so building relationships. This is a picture from CCO that I had a contact of mine email me, and that's essentially what a newsroom looks like. You can see there Esme Murphy, for those folks who are Twin Cities viewers, Bill Hudson in the corner there, and then Pete, the guy in the corner, the guy behind the desk whose head's sticking up. He's the assignment editor over at WCCO, and he's the guy who's on the receiving end of all of our pitches. And that desk right there, that literally is the assignment desk. It's a giant desk in the middle of the newsroom, and he has to cull through all of these. In addition to reading through all the pitches and the press releases, he's listening to 2-3 police scanners, and he's also listening to the scanner traffic from all of his photographers out in the field. So assignment editors are multitaskers. They're doing multiple things at once. So when you get them on the phone, they don't have a whole lot of time to chit-chat with you. It's, do you have the release? Do you know what's going on? Great. Get there. And so just be mindful of that. Again, we talk about when you send out your information or your stuff, follow up with a phone call. Your timing in the mornings, 8:15 to 9 a.m. is always a good time to call because that's when they're getting in. They're pulling out their information for the day, which stories are going on. They're looking at the events from overnight. Most TV stations or newspapers have what are called editorial meetings anytime between 9 and 10:30. So, and these are the meetings. These are the meetings where they actually decide what they're going to do that day. So they all get together and they say, here are our top stories. Here's what we have to cover. Here are our secondary stories. Here's what we want to cover. Most of the stuff that we send out are going to be those secondary stories. Here's what we want to cover. So that's why it's important that you get to them and they have it on their calendar as they're going into that meeting. And also what you want to do is just see what's going on the news. Follow Twitter. Twitter, even if you're not hardcore into tweeting stuff out and social media, I typically use Twitter and Facebook as a passive mechanism so I know what's going on. It's one more way to see to see what's going on. I think we're going to pull up that.
Yeah, can we walk through something like that, Joe?
Yeah, so.
Because things are so immediate these days.
So let's take a look at the Twitter thing first. Okay, so this is a good one. This particular screen you're seeing right now, it's called TweetDeck, and it's a program that you could just go on the internet and pull up TweetDeck and sign up. If you don't have a Twitter account, I suggest that you sign up for a Twitter account. The thing about Twitter, it's complicated, is that you have to sort of be consistent at it. And what I would suggest is if your organization wants to have some sort of Twitter presence, that you are very deliberate about what that Twitter presence is. How often do you want to tweet? The most important thing I would suggest is if you're going to go that route, designate someone in the office to tweet at least once, twice, possibly 3 times a week about what's going on internally. You could comment about what's going on at the legislature and how it affects your policies or your particular nonprofit. Or the other good thing that I like about Twitter is if there are folks in your community, if you're number of nonprofits, but say they keep picking homeless advocates. If you're a homeless advocate and there's a great new study, a national study that comes out about homelessness, tweet that out. Retweet that out. So that's what I would,
And so, Joe, we've talked about a number of different ways, venues for media, different ways to communicate. Where does Twitter fit in there? Like, do you see it as an end in itself, or is it more a means to getting some of that other kinds of media coverage?
Twitter is what you make it. You could have Twitter be passive, and it's a way for you to follow news. So it's a quick way for you to A, follow reporters, but then B, also follow what's going on. So you see that fourth column I have, it says Minnesota MN Leg. That's what's going on at the legislature right now. So all the happenings at the Minnesota State Legislature, I follow on that particular column. That first column is my feed. That's who I personally follow. And these 2 columns in the center are Minnesota 2020's columns. So Minnesota 2020, we have a full-time social media person who does social media, new media, graphic design, a number of things in that area. But it's her job to make sure the face of Minnesota 2020 is out in social media. That's not what I personally do. I more follow it passively, but I understand for our organization that these 2 middle columns, the Minnesota 2020 presence, is important. I'll give you a good example, like that top one that popped up, Pat Kessler. So Pat Kessler, I would follow, if you want to follow media especially, I would follow a couple of key media people. The key media people who are good Twitterers or tweeters are Pat Kessler from WCCO, Tom Hauser from the Channel 5, John Croman from Channel 11, along with Rachel Stassenberger at the newspaper, at the Star Tribune. Also, for folks who are down in Rochester, Mike Doherty, the editor of the Post-Bulletin, is also really good at tweeting. I follow them and see what's going on and see what's shaking, and that helps me when I call the media. I know what's going on in their newsrooms. I know what they're following, and so it helps break the ice. A good example of convergence of media is we had a press conference last week on Tax Day with Minnesota Council of Nonprofits and put out the advisories, got the media there, and Pat Kessler showed up. And he didn't have a photographer available, and it wasn't a piece that they were going to do a whole lot about, but Pat came and he tweeted the event and he shot a link to the actual report, which is really, really valuable because we'll click on Kessler's if we click on Kessler there, he has 16,000 followers. So if we take a look at a small local newspaper, say Windham, if I go all the way down to Windham, do an event, and get in Windham's paper, I have maybe 10,000 people that's circulating to. But if Pat Kessler shows up at my media event and shoots out a tweet about my event with a link to my story or a link to my report, that's 16,000 followers. And so, it's still valuable. Even though he might not have broadcast the story about us that night, his 16,000 followers were still really important to us. But again, the reason why Kessler has that following isn't because he's this prolific person on Twitter. It's because he's with WCCO. So he's a mainstream media personality or a mainstream media reporter who's able to take advantage of this convergence. So that's another way to think about Twitter as well. So you might say, I don't want to waste my time with it. I know it's important, but it's just too much. What I would suggest is start a Twitter account, try to put up 1 or 2 things a week, but more importantly, build a set of people that you follow. Build a set of news people, policy people, people at the legislature that you could follow. This way you're tuned in as to what's going on.
So you're saying just use it to gather information for yourself so you can get your story out, that your press release will be more effective and well-timed.
Yeah, and so the other thing you start to learn at Twitter is about folks who are, the other thing is you learn what's going on in media, in newsrooms. So then you have a good idea of who would be a good person to pitch on a particular story. And then same thing with Facebook. I won't get into too much detail, but Facebook, same way. Some people tend to think, Facebook, I got to have everything I do that's out, that has to be out right away. No, Facebook's a medium where you maybe want 1, 2 posts a day tops. You don't want to overload Facebook. The other thing about Facebook is timing. Timing is important on Facebook. If you're going to put a Facebook post out, do it in the morning, do it late in the afternoon, do it around lunchtime, because that's when people are looking at Facebook. So we could look at, and then the other thing is we want to look at the release. So this is a release that we put together for our report. Again, headline, attention-grabbing headline. You want to state what you need to state in that first column, in that first paragraph. Why it's important, why we're here. Just spit it out right away. Get the most important information out right away. And the one thing I would suggest, too, is be news consumers. Read the paper, listen to what's going on in the news, and that'll help you help you frame things out as you go. And we could keep moving from there.
Joe, let me mention one thing for folks on the phone that maybe spend a fair amount of time at the Capitol. If you haven't made your way down through the tunnel system into the bowels of the Capitol, you'll find the Capitol Press Corps offices. And it can be very effective to bring your, one-page press release, your fact sheet, your flyer for an event, and do a walkthrough, and you'll see every major media outlet, name on the door, NPR, CCO, KARE 11, all the print media, radio from around the state, and you can do a quick hit and try and generate some interest in your cause.
The other big thing with press releases, no more than 1 page. I mean, this one sort of dropped off onto the second page with our little about blurbs, but no more than 1 page. And again, you want to tailor your press release. If you're doing a statewide tour, don't give the same press release to every media. Make sure there's something in each local media outlet in your release.
Great. We have a couple videos that you wanted to share, Joe. So do you want to queue up what you'd like to say about the crumbling fiscal foundation here before we start?
The crumbling fiscal foundation was just Minnesota 2020's way to push back on a lot of this. Minnesota spends too much. Minnesota's overtaxed. And our tax policy fellow, Jeff Van Wyken, took a look at the numbers and showed the apples-to-apples comparison that we're not spending out of control. And we have a video capability in-house, and we do our own videos. So this is just a highlight of what our press event looks like.
Great. And I think the video may be a little bit choppy, for which we apologize. I don't think it comes through the greatest on the stream, but let's give it a try here.
Today, Minnesota 2020 releases its report, Crumbling Fiscal Foundation. This report demonstrates conclusively that Minnesota state spending over the last 10 years has declined by 18.3%. Minnesota, as a result, doesn't have the transit, support for small business, roads, classrooms that we had 10 years ago.
DEED's support of women venture is just one state budget decision that has a real impact on people like me. State investments in small businesses like Hamden Music School mean more jobs and healthier and stronger and more viable neighborhoods.
And I would very much like to encourage adequate funding for transit, including the continuation of our through bus service between Roseville and downtown St. Paul.
And, you know, the stories you hear about transit, or you hear about small business, or you hear about people with disabilities that want to be part of the workforce. These are the kinds of things that will strengthen the economy, make Minnesota more prosperous in general. This report gives evidence to the fact that we have not been investing in our state services as we should be.
We believe that the truth should come out. Minnesota does not have a spending problem. Minnesota has a problem of a lack of investment, and investment is the answer to make sure that we are successful in the future.
Now, Joe, I saw a lot of fine nonprofits represented there in that short clip. How did you connect and partner with those groups?
So what we typically do when we have events is, since Minnesota 2020 is a policy organization, we don't have much of a field staff. So what I typically do is try to find local partners. In this particular case, we partnered with Invest in Minnesota specifically, and Invest in Minnesota Coalition helped find some of the folks we used. But as you saw in that piece, we had a transit rider, and we had a small business person that we profiled. The other thing we saw is, in that particular instance, is our visual. We usually have some kind of graph or some kind of tag board type piece that we have as a visual for the media to focus in on as well. And
if you're on the call there, I think you just heard a pitch from Joe. They're looking for stories and help out here.
Yeah, we're constantly looking for folks to partner up with when we're doing stuff out state. And so if you maybe are a little apprehensive about taking on a press event on your own, but you have a piece that you're working on that we're also working on, we could always figure out ways to partner together. And then, all right, so what you typically want to do, even after you're out there and they come to your event and everything goes well, you want to watch or read the story. You want to monitor the coverage. The other thing you want to do, and this is how you start to build those relationships, is chart that coverage in your spreadsheet. Make sure you have the facts, the numbers, where it aired, what type of story they did. Was it a VO, which is a voiceover, or a VOSOT, which is a voiceover with a soundbite, or was it a package, a reporter putting their package together, or was it a feature story in the newspaper, page one kind of thing. So you want to chart in a spreadsheet to keep track of your media. And then, you want to follow up with reporters. If they did a particularly good job, shoot them a quick email. Hey, say, thanks for coming out to the event. We really appreciate it. It's fair coverage. And then, again, get that reporter's name and number, and that's one more contact to add to your list. Also, be respectful of professional decisions. They might not tell the story exactly how you want them to tell the story. They might not tell the story exactly in the same way or hit all your main talking points. That's okay. Don't second guess or undermine what they're doing. What you want to be careful of is to make sure they're not getting into any fact errors, so that they reported everything accurately. And if they misreported something, or if they got into a fact error, you just want to give them a gentle, respectful, professional reminder and correct them. Because the thing is whatever they wrote is going to live on their website forever. So you want to make sure it's corrected on the website. And then if all goes well, this is sort of a highlight of our videos over the last couple of years.
A report just released by the think tank Minnesota 2020 says more must be done to keep our state's regional airports open.
For the rural areas, it's their connection to the wider world.
A new study shows Minnesota school superintendents don't believe education funding is headed in the right direction.
we shouldn't have to rely on local property taxpayers' ability to pay to educate our students.
Minnesota 2020.
Minnesota 2020.
Minnesota 2020 researchers say wastewater infrastructure across greater Minnesota is nearing a breaking point.
That problem prompted the think tank Minnesota 2020 to create an extensive statewide report called Wasting Away.
As old pipes are slowly breaking down, and soon our environment and our economy is going to be hurt.
Minnesota 2020, which is a St. Paul think tank, wants you to consider green gifts this holiday season.
It released a report saying, anything you can name, we have fallen far behind in our infrastructure in Minnesota. Minnesota 2020 believes the state should start building. It points to low interest rates and low contractor bids.
A group called Minnesota 2020 wants you to include this thought. Co-ops are vehicles to help boost business.
So we're finding ways to how do we overcome problems? And these models work.
There's a new report out this morning by Minnesota 2020. It's this report, and it charts the rise of foot power.
If you build it, they will come on 2 feet.
Minnesota 2020 is a nonpartisan think tank that focuses on education, healthcare, transportation, and economic development.
So, Joe, I think what you've shown us is, at least from Minnesota 2020's examples, a really comprehensive communications organization, right? So you guys have been really successful in using lots of different vehicles and obviously gotten a lot of coverage. I want to pull us back just a little bit and ask, let's assume that some of our participants don't have as much resources or experience as your organization brings. Where would you advise people to start and to focus, right? So we have all these different tools. We have social media. Where to begin?
If you want to make a sort of an immediate impact with media, and the low stress level way to do it is through the op-ed. The op-ed is something that a lot of organizations have the expertise to write. It's not a lot of heavy lifting. They don't have to find a local partner, and they write a 600-word piece that they could submit to either the local paper or one of the big papers. So the op-ed's kind of a way to just get your voice out there and get your policy issue out there. And so that's probably where I would start. If you don't do any of these things, at least consider writing either an op-ed or even a letter to the editor, which is even shorter, to your local paper or outlet.
And let me just bring this back up to the big picture for a minute as you think about the rest of the series you've been participating in here. We're honing in today on media tactics and strategies, and this is just one part of what should be your multi-pronged strategies of doing good research and data, direct lobbying efforts, grassroots mobilizing around your issue. But the goal here is to move the public debate, right? And I think some of the side benefits that we haven't really discussed is, one, obviously some visibility and clout. And that was an impressive group of clips, Joe, that Minnesota 2020 has amassed there. And that can be helpful, that visibility, that clout will be helpful in your advocacy. It will also be helpful in your fundraising to show that you're a source on this issue.
We have a couple questions coming in, and it looks like I think all the folks can see the comments, which I thought, I wasn't sure if everybody would be able to see them. But go ahead and keep sending us questions as we wrap up for a few minutes. Some of the questions that are coming in, so we have paid media where you pay to get an advertisement in there, and we have earned media where, it's just what we've been talking about. Can you just say a little bit about paid media and, when might a nonprofit want to shell out some money for that?
Paid media is very expensive, and the tough thing about Minnesota 2020 generally does all earned media. So we typically don't do paid media. The difficulty about paid media is you need the frequency in order for your dollars to pay off. So it's one of these economic things where the diminishing, you have to spend a certain amount of money before you see any return. So that's the thing. If you're a small nonprofit and don't have a whole lot of money, I wouldn't suggest doing paid media. If you have enough money to do some kind of paid media campaign, I would hire a communications person as opposed to get you unearned media, or to get you earned media as opposed to paid media. If you have lots and lots and lots of money, then you might want to talk to that's not an area of my expertise, but I do know it's expensive to really make your mark.
Right. We had a question a while back about Twitter. And what about having a group of people keep that updated versus a single person? Because I assume one person may not all the time, but a group of people may be harder to keep it consistent. Yeah. So what have you seen more successful there?
With social media, you want things to be consistent from a policy standpoint and your messaging standpoint. So I would definitely designate one person to be in charge of it, just because if it's sort of by committee, it's going to fall through the cracks. So I would designate one person to do it all the time, but that doesn't mean that other people in the organization can't fill in. So what Minnesota 2020 typically does is all of our people tweet, and our main Twitter coordinator, Rachel Weeks, when we tweet stuff as individuals, she'll retweet them under the Minnesota 2020 banner. So what I would do is have one person designated, but let everybody tweet, and then under their own Twitter handle, and then as an organization, you retweet what they're saying.
So we're about out of time. I wanted to remind people of the resources that we have with this. So this will be recorded and archived on our YouTube page. I'll send a link to that. Joe provided some media contact lists to us that I'll send out again. That was for both Twin Cities and Greater Minnesota. He also provided a sample press release, and feel free to use those to build your own. That's all I had. Jeannie, did you have something?
I will just do a quick thank you to Joe for sharing his expertise. You've got his contact information there, so let him be a resource to you. And I want to thank everyone on the call today for joining us and for all the work that you do in your own individual nonprofits.
So we hope to see you next month, where we'll be talking about working with your member of Congress. In the meantime, or at any point, if you have questions about using media and using communications, our contact is there, both Jeannie's and Joe's, and we encourage you to be in touch. Thanks. We hope to see you next month.